The endocrine system is composed of 10 glands in different parts of the body. When the endocrine glands are stimulated, they produce molecules called hormones and release them into the vascular system. Hormones are like chemical messengers, transported by the blood to target cells. When it reaches a target cell, the hormone attaches itself to a specific receptor, which triggers a physiological process such as cell division. The production of many hormones is controlled by two small structures located at the base of the brain, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is composed of nerve nuclei that control vital functions such as sleep. The hypothalamus also controls the pituitary gland, which is the main hormone-producing gland. The pituitary gland alone secretes 9 different hormones. Vasopressin, for example, regulates kidney functioning. Oxytocin causes contractions of the uterus during childbirth. Other pituitary hormones control skin pigmentation and bone growth. Together, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland produce a third of the body's hormones. They therefore have an effect on many physiological processes.
So the endocrine system relies on hormones, which are signaling molecules. They're released into the bloodstream by endocrine cells and glands. They go to all locations in the body and have longer lasting effects than those produced by the nervous system.
Okay, so the nervous system consists of neurons that transmit signals along dedicated routes called nerve impulses, which connect specific locations in the body. While the two systems often work closely together, there are some key differences.
The endocrine system acts slower than the nervous system and has longer lasting effects such as adrenaline.
For example, the nervous system is better equipped for handling immediate rapid responses, such as reflexes. This is how a nerve impulse travels down an axon. In comparison, this is how slow a hormone travels in the endocrine system.
This is the pineal gland. It's located right there. It is known as the third eye. It produces melatonin, which helps maintain circadian rhythms on a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. The melatonin secretion is dictated by light, and the pineal gland also regulates reproductive hormones.
The thyroid gland is located in the neck and controls growth and development through the rate of metabolism. The parathyroid gland is also located in the neck, and it consists of 4 tiny glands surrounding the thyroid. It produces the parathyroid hormone and controls blood calcium levels.
The adrenal gland is located above the kidneys and it produces adrenaline, aldosterone, and cortisol. Aldosterone regulates salt balance and blood volume, and cortisol influences metabolism rates of proteins, fats, and sugars.
Our female gonads that supply eggs, they regulate menstrual cycles and produce estrogen and progesterone. They are not directly attached to the fallopian tubes, but they are against the wall of the pelvis known as the ovarian fossa. And the most common problem is polycystic ovary syndrome.
Alright, these are the testes. They release androgens which support sperm formation and promotes development of male secondary characteristics.
The hypothalamus controls neuroendocrine signaling in mammals. It's considered the master regulatory gland and helps regulate the anterior pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is connected to the hypothalamus through the pituitary stalk, and the two glands commonly work together. So it's actually composed of a posterior and anterior part. The posterior releases oxytocin to stimulate contractions of the uterus in females, and the anterior releases several different hormones, including FSH and LH, which stimulate ovaries and testes, and growth hormone, which stimulates growth and metabolic functions.
This is the pancreas. It uses insulin to lower blood glucose level, and issues associated with this gland can cause diabetes.
The thymus is located beneath the breastbone at heart level. It has 2 lobes and can be divided into the cortex, medulla, outer zone, and inner zone. It is composed primarily of lymphocytes and reticular cells. We will now go more in depth into the endocrine system. How is the endocrine system turned off?
The endocrine system is turned off by a pathway called negative feedback or feedback inhibition. It is a control circuit or loop that reduces or dampens the stimulus. Insulin, for example, is a hormone that is secreted and triggers a reduction in blood glucose levels, which in turn eliminates the stimulus for further insulin release. Because negative feedback prevents excessive pathway activity, this type of control is pretty common to the endocrine system. Here is a demonstration of how this process works.
How does positive feedback work?
A few hormone pathways are controlled by positive feedback, a control mechanism in which the response reinforces the stimulus, leading to an even greater response. Positive feedback loop helps drive a process to completion. For example, this plays a role in several processes such as reproduction and uterine contractions during childbirth. Here's an example of positive feedback.
To go more in depth about negative and positive feedback, here's a short video that will also introduce some new topics that will be discussed later.
Did you know just sitting here right now, you're doing something absolutely remarkable? Well, your cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, yes, we just leveled up those biological levels of organization, they're all working towards something called homeostasis. It's a state of balance. Yes, homeostasis means many things in your body. For example, that your blood stays within a certain pH level range. It means that your blood glucose remains within a certain range. It means your internal body temperature stays within a certain range. See, we've mentioned the major body systems before and that they work together. And today we're going to talk about how they work together using something called positive and negative feedback, and also how this relates to homeostasis. So many years ago, I had a pet bearded dragon. Her name was Debbie, and she was the best lizard ever. Debbie used to sit on our couch with me when I'd watch TV, and she loved to have her chin scratched. I even got her a bearded dragon leash so I could take her outside. Yeah, they make those. Anyway, Debbie loved her heat lamp. She would sit under the heat lamp on her rock, and when she got too hot, she would get off her rock and out of the heat lamp range and go somewhere else. She had a huge enclosure, too, because I wanted Debbie to be a happy lizard so she could find an ideal temperature. Well, why all this talk about Debbie? Well, Debbie is an example of an animal that some people refer to as cold-blooded, or a fancier term, ectotherm. We actually like the fancier term a bit better, though, because her blood isn't necessarily cold. Her body temperature can fluctuate with the environment. But not you. You are warm-blooded, or the fancier term, an endotherm. Your body works hard to keep the internal temperature it keeps. It's also a beautiful example of something called negative feedback. Before we define it, let us show you this example. Say you're in an environment that is very hot, like being outside in the Texas summer heat. That's typically hot. Thanks to nerves which can act as sensors, the brain notices this. It will send signals to counteract this variable. Sweat glands do what they do best, sweat. Heat is lost as that sweat evaporates off your skin. You may have some redness too. That's because your blood vessels are getting wider, dilating, in order to help get rid of that heat. And the result, whether you realize it or not, helps you lower your body temperature. But wait, what if you go inside now and the AC is blasting? You'll stop sweating. You may even shiver. The muscle contractions of shivering can generate heat. And those blood vessels will now decrease in diameter size, constrict, to help you conserve the heat because that makes it harder for the heat to escape. Your body temperature can increase then. This is negative feedback. So a simplified definition, negative feedback is when some variable triggers a counteracting response in order to come back to some set point. If we consider that this whole thing is actually a negative feedback loop, we can see that the negative feedback brings the body back to the set point, which in this case is a stable temperature, keeping homeostasis. Negative feedback is also going on in the regulation of your glucose, your blood sugar. Okay, we're really simplifying this here, as we often do. But when glucose, blood sugar, is too high, one hormone that is released is insulin. I always imagine insulin as this hormone that makes the cells say, "feed me," because it has the ability to make cells take in glucose. On the flip side, if glucose is too low in the blood, a hormone called glucagon can be released. This hormone can have many effects, and one of them is that it can cause the liver to release glucose into the blood. There's more to the regulation of blood sugar than this, but you can see how this is negative feedback. You have counteracting responses here in order to keep homeostasis. So, what about positive feedback? Positive feedback is when, instead of getting a counteracting response to some variable, you instead intensify the variable. Positive feedback can be like more, instead of let's counteract this. The example that always stuck with me when I was a student is the example about the human baby being born. In biology classrooms everywhere, it's a classic example. When a human baby is ready to be born, there is pressure on the cervix, and that pressure and the hormones involved cause contractions of the uterus, because that's a big part about how the baby is going to be born. More release of hormones will equal more contractions and pressure, which will cause more release of hormones. And more release of hormones will mean more contractions and pressure. Contractions help get the baby out, but it's also a part of a beautiful illustration of what positive feedback can do. So why do we care about feedback? Other than, the importance of negative feedback in maintaining homeostasis and the role of positive feedback in many body processes. Well, we also need to understand feedback so we can understand what is happening when there is a problem in the feedback systems. One example, perhaps you've heard of type 1 diabetes. It's a disorder that can mean that your pancreas, which is an organ that is involved with making some hormones like insulin, is not working correctly. Insulin is not produced, and because of that, one issue is that you're not going to be able to get glucose, the blood sugar, into your cells. Now, glucose outside of the cells cannot be used in cellular respiration. The cells need to take the glucose in to make ATP energy in cellular respiration. Therefore, your cells need to be able to take in the glucose to survive. So many type 1 diabetics need to give themselves insulin and monitor their blood sugar because the negative feedback may not work as it should. Well, that's it for the Meet the Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
So far, we have talked about the different types of hormones produced, as well as the different feedback mechanisms involving them, but we have not yet talked about hormone signaling.
This is the lipid bilayer of a cell. Many hormones are soluble in water, but not in lipids, so they cannot pass through the lipid bilayer. Some of them, however, bind to the outside membrane. This is called signal transduction pathway. The signal transduction pathway sets off a series of events within the cell. Some hormones, especially sex hormones, are soluble in lipids, so they can go right through the membrane.
Many hormones elicit more than one response. For example, epinephrine is secreted by the adrenal glands and helps raise blood glucose levels, increase blood flow to muscles, and decreases blood flow to the digestive system.
Josie is on the floor laughing. Laughing produces stress-relieving hormones such as cortisol and epinephrine.
Animals strive to maintain homeostasis, which is the tendency of biological systems to maintain a relatively constant condition in the internal environment while continuously interacting with and adjusting to changes originating within or outside the system. It is through homeostatic mechanisms that body temperature is kept within the normal range, as well as osmotic pressures and pH levels. These are but a few examples of the thousands of homeostatic control systems within the body.
Before we go more in depth, we're going to start with a non-living example of homeostasis. Regulating room temperature depends on a control center, such as this thermostat, that detects a temperature change and activates mechanisms that reverse that change.
One example of homeostasis is acid, base, balance. So the body controls the amounts of acids and bases in the blood. When the number of acidic compounds in the blood increases, the body acidity also increases. The kidneys and lungs, along with the buffer systems, help control the acid-base balance. Another example is glucose concentration. The body uses glucose as a source of energy, but too much or too little in the bloodstream can cause serious complications. The body uses hormones to regulate glucose concentrations. Insulin reduces glucose concentrations while other hormones raise it.
Another example is body temperature. Animals rely largely on negative feedback to maintain homeostasis. For example, when you exercise vigorously, you produce heat, which increases your body temperature. Your body detects this increase and triggers sweating. As you sweat, the evaporation of moisture from your skin cools your body, helping return your body temperature to its set point.
Our final example of homeostasis is fluid volume. The body has to maintain a constant internal environment, which means it must regulate the loss and gain of fluids. Hormones help to regulate this balance by causing the excretion or retention of fluids. If the body does not have enough fluids, ADH signals the kidneys to retain fluids and decrease urine output. If the body has too much fluids, it suppresses aldosterone and signals the excretion of more urine. Perfect. Our final example of homeostasis is fluid volume. The body has to maintain a constant internal environment, which means it must regulate the loss and gain of fluids. Hormones help to regulate this balance by causing the excretion or retention of fluids. If the body does not have enough fluids, ADH signals the kidneys to retain fluids and decrease urine output. If the body has too much fluids, it suppresses aldosterone and signals the excretion of more urine. Perfect. Here are a few key terms about homeostasis that you might want to hint star underline. The first one is set point. The set point is at or near a particular value that homeostasis is trying to reach. The second is stimulus. The stimulus is a fluctuation in the variable above or below the set point.
For some more homeostasis key terms. First one, a sensor. A sensor is a receptor that detects the stimulus. The next one, a response. Is a physiological activity triggered by a change in a variable. The next one, a response, is a physiological activity triggered by a change in a variable. In cellular communication, the change in a specific cellular activity brought about by a transduced signal from outside the cell is a response.
Another important example of homeostasis is thermoregulation, which is the process by which animals maintain their body temperature within a normal range. It's really important that animals are able to regulate this because body temperatures outside of this range can reduce the efficiency of enzymatic reactions or alter the fluidity of cellular membranes.
Endothermic organisms that are warmed by heat generated by their own metabolism. They usually maintain a relatively stable body temperature above the temperature of the external environment, even in extreme fluctuations in external temperature. Many endothermic animals rely on countercurrent exchange, the transfer of heat or solutes between fluids that are flowing in opposite directions. This is demonstrated in the opposite directions of arteries and veins.
Next, we're going to talk about ectothermic organisms. Ectothermic organisms are organisms that rely on external heat sources for bodily warmth. Because they do not need to use energy to warm themselves, they do not need to consume as much food as endothermic organisms. However, they are not mutually exclusive. For example, an endothermic human may warm themselves by basking in the sun, much like an ectothermic lizard. Thank you to the following sources: the Amoeba Sisters for uploading the video Homeostasis and Negative/Positive Feedback, and the Merck manuals for uploading the video The Endocrine System and Hormones.
Okay, thank you for the biology textbook and all the authors that contributed to that. Also, thank you to Lee Zakowski for creating the website 5 Common Examples of Homeostasis in the Body.